Something huge is happening in Africa, and no one is talking about it. At first glance, all you'll see are some ships, roads, and infrastructure. But if you look closely, you'll realize this isn't just about building infrastructure, it's a well-planned effort for something much bigger. China is silently laying the foundation of its military power here. From Djibouti on the eastern coast to Equatorial Guinea on the western side, from the warm waters of Tanzania to the deep sea ports of Angola, military bases are being established everywhere. Partnerships are being formed, and China is planting its flags. But the question is, why is China doing all this? Is it just to protect its trade routes? Or is there a much bigger goal hidden behind this strategy? In the next few minutes, I'm going to explain step by step how China's moves in Africa are not only going to impact Africa, but also change the global balance of power. China's strategy could completely reshape world trade routes and military dynamics. What's happening in Africa today will decide who controls the world's oceans and economy tomorrow. Before we dive in, a quick request. Please subscribe to the channel. It all started with Djibouti, a tiny country near the Horn of Africa, so small it's hard to find on the map, but massively important in global geopolitics. In 2017, China established its first overseas military base here. Right next to this base is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, one of the most important choke points in the world. Every day, around 10% of global trade passes through this strait, including oil, gas, and industrial goods. This trade travels from the Indian Ocean through the strait into the Red Sea, then crosses the Suez Canal and heads to Europe. Whoever controls this choke point can control global trade. And China's base in Djibouti isn't some small setup. Satellite images show bunkers, underground facilities, and a deep water port capable of hosting even aircraft carriers. Chinese troops are visibly stationed here, meaning the base is fully operational. But the most interesting thing is that this Chinese base is located just a few kilometers away from American, French, and Japanese military bases. So basically, Chinese, American, French, and Japanese soldiers are operating in the same area, just a stone's throw apart. That's why Djibouti has become a high-tension zone. It feels like a silent, cold war, with each country quietly watching the others. But Djibouti is just the beginning. China's focus has now shifted thousands of kilometers west to Equatorial Guinea, a small country on the Atlantic coast, where China is actively implementing its military expansion strategy. Just like Djibouti gave China a grip over the Indian Ocean, Guinea could give it entry into the Atlantic Ocean. And the best spot for this base is a port city called Bata. At first glance, Bata looks like a normal shipping hub, but classified information suggests that China is planning to convert this port into a full-fledged military base. Why is this important for the rest of the world? So far, China's naval presence has been limited to the Pacific and Indian Oceans areas close to its borders. But if China builds a naval base in Bata, it will gain direct access to the Atlantic Ocean, a region traditionally dominated by the US and its allies. From there, China could monitor West Africa and potentially extend its reach all the way to South America, even the US coastline. This isn't just speculation. According to leaked intelligence reports and US defense assessments, China could use this port to refuel its warships and resupply them with weapons. This is a major development. Until now, China's Navy had to rely on faraway bases to operate outside Asia, but if this base becomes active, China will have a forward position previously held only by the US forward. That's why the US at the port is worried. It has declared this situation a national security threat because for the first time since World War II, a new superpower is planning to establish a military base in a region long dominated by the United States. Just think about it. A few years ago, China didn't have a single military base outside its own region. Today, it's expanding its military presence across the globe, and Equatorial Guinea could become the most important foothold for China in the Atlantic. If this base becomes operational, China won't just be challenging the US in Asia, it will be confronting it directly in the Atlantic as well. And this isn't just a strategy, it's a bold geopolitical message. This base could completely change the naval dynamics of the Atlantic Ocean, an ocean that the US has dominated for decades. But China's Atlantic ambitions don't stop with Guinea. Just a little further up the same coast is Gabon, a resource-rich country where China isn't openly building a base, but is doing things that are just as significant. China is quietly signing secret trade deals and military agreements in Gabon. In April 2023, China upgraded its relations with Gabon to what it called a comprehensive strategic cooperative partnership. Now that might sound like just a diplomatic phrase, but behind it, China is making heavy investments and possibly signing secret military pacts. Gabon's government hasn't officially confirmed the presence of any Chinese military base, but many analysts believe that this so-called trade partnership will soon turn into a security arrangement. China's long-standing strategy has been enter a country through economics, then slowly expand military presence, and just south of Gabon, in Angola, China has already demonstrated this playbook. Angola is strategically important due to its location and natural resources. Since 2007, China has been Angola's largest trading partner. It has invested billions in Angola's oil industry, construction projects, and ports. Today, China is not only Angola's biggest trade partner, but also its largest lender and strongest supporter. The capital city Luanda's port has become a hub of Chinese investment. This port has been modernized using Chinese funding, and here's where things get really interesting. The port is built with a dual-use design, meaning it can handle both commercial and military ships. It has berths and logistics setups that support full naval operations. In normal conditions, it handles trade and cargo, but in a warlike situation, China could easily convert it into a foreign military facility and support warships and even submarines from there. So while China may not have fully operational military bases in Gabon and Angola yet, its growing presence in these countries gives it strategic options. And in geopolitics, the side with more options is the side with more power. Through its presence in countries like Djibouti and Guinea, China will weave a web of influence. And this won't just be about one base or one port. This will be a continent-wide strategy that will allow Beijing to gain dominance in a region once ruled solely by the West. China isn't just creating new plans in West Africa or Southern Africa. It is also reinforcing the ones it laid down years ago. They were sown years ago. The biggest example of this long-term strategy is Tanzania, a country where China has been busy increasing its influence since the time of war. In the 1960s and 70s, when African countries were gaining independence, China saw an opportunity to build trust with these countries. The most famous project of that time was the Tanzania-Zambia Railway, a massive railway network built with China CIP's help. Through it, Zambia was able to export its goods to the rest of the world via Tanzania. This wasn't just aid. Rather, it was China's first attempt to expand its influence in Africa. And even today, China continues to follow the same strategy. It has heavily invested in Tanzania's ports, roads, and energy sector. But among all these, the most important and controversial project was the Bagamoyo Port Project. The aim was to turn Bagamoyo into Africa's largest port, and all construction was to be done by Chinese companies. This port was planned to be built right along the Indian Ocean, just north of Dar es Salaam, and it was designed to have such massive capacity that it could easily handle military weapons, even naval operations. It could also handle warships. But later the Tanzanian government stopped the project, saying that some of the terms posed a threat to its sovereignty. Despite this, China's interest in the area never faded. Besides Bagamoyo, China has maintained very strong military cooperation with Tanzania, and the navies of both countries regularly conduct joint military exercises here. China has even built military academies and training centers here using its own funds. There is one special thing about Tanzania, which China cannot get from any other Central African country, that is such a long coastline along the Indian Ocean. If China wants to increase its naval presence in Eastern Africa, besides Djibouti, there is no better option than Tanzania. Through this, China can keep an eye not only on East Africa, but also on the shipping routes from the Gulf of Aden all the way to Southeast Asia. And remember one more thing, China makes deals quietly and gradually increases its presence in that country. That's why, although China doesn't have an official military base in Tanzania today, it has made the Tanzanian government so dependent on it that if needed, Tanzania won't be able to refuse China's demands. So on one hand, China is expanding military cooperation with countries like Tanzania in East Africa. At the same time, since 2018, its attention has also turned to countries like Namibia on the southern west coast of Africa. This country offers China two important things which very few African countries can offer. One is access to the South Atlantic Ocean, and the other is a stable political environment. The country's most important asset is the Walvis Bay port. Over the past nearly 20 years, China has invested millions of dollars in this port. In fact, in 2012, the contract to upgrade this port was awarded to a Chinese company, and the contract was valued at $260 million. On the surface, this port is built for commercial use, but many analysts say that this port it has a dual design. That means if needed, this port can be quickly transformed into a naval base because it has berths for large sea vessels and an advanced logistics setup, which is usually found only in naval bases. So, if tensions rise in the future, China can use Walvis Bay as a military base to station its navy here. And here's where it gets really interesting. Once again, if China activates both Walvis Bay and the Lunda port in Angola, these dual-use ports as naval access points, this would give China control over more than half of Africa's coastline. It would create a chain of bases starting from Djibouti in the northeast, passing through Tanzania, and extending all the way to the South Atlantic Ocean. In this way, China would be in a position to encircle nearly the entire African continent, not only economically through trade, but also militarily. This would allow China to monitor sea traffic coming from Latin America, Central Europe, and the Gulf of Guinea, and if necessary, intervene without relying on its bases in Asia. So, China is setting up a strategic chessboard in Africa, and ports like Walvis Bay and Lunda are the pawns that are soon going to become queens. So far, you've seen how China is strengthening its roots across Africa from Djibouti to Angola. But what is the real purpose behind all this? Why is China building military bases so far beyond its borders? Why is it investing in ports? And why is it making military deals? There are 3 reasons for this. China's first and foremost objective is protection. In fact, China has built its belt. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, China has invested billions of dollars in Africa, mostly in roads, ports, railways, power plants, mining, and telecom sectors. But the problem is that Africa is a highly politically volatile continent. There are unstable governments, corruption, civil unrest, and even the threat of terrorism. That's why China wants to secure its investments here, and obviously it cannot rely solely on its bases in Asia for this. It needs a presence on this very continent. China needs bases on the continent from where it can quickly deploy its military power in case of any threat. The second reason is power projection. China doesn't just want to become wealthy, it wants everyone to not only fear it, but also respect it. Just like the American Navy ruled the world's seas for years, controlling oceans from Japan to Italy, now China wants to do something similar. By establishing bases along Africa's eastern and western coastlines, it aims to control 2 of the world's most important and China wants to control the 2 major oceans, the Indian and the Atlantic Ocean. With these bases, China's navy and submarines will be able to patrol the region, and whenever needed, they can easily project their power from the Persian Gulf all the way to the coasts of South America. This is no longer just about regional dominance, but about global reach. The third and final reason behind China establishing bases in Africa is competition. The US already has several military bases in Africa, such as Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti. Similarly, France and even Japan have bases here. These bases are used for anti-terrorism operations and to monitor sea traffic. So China thinks, why should I fall behind anyone? Why should only the West control Africa? By establishing these bases, China is sending a message to the world that it will no longer follow the rules made by others. China doesn't just want a seat at the global table anymore, it wants to build its own table. So what we are seeing is not just the story of Africa. The map of global power is being redefined. For centuries, for a long time, Europe and America maintained complete control over Africa. But now China is slowly redrawing that map, and without firing a single bullet or missile, with every new port and every new agreement, China is laying the foundation for a new world order. One where power won't be concentrated only in Washington or Brussels, but also in Beijing. Africa is no longer just a hub of resources, it's becoming the new battleground for global superpowers. Just a few days ago, I made another video about Russia, about how all of the West's predictions about it were wrong, why they turned out to be wrong. Do check out that video as well. I'll see you in the next one with another interesting topic. Take care of yourself.